long-form radio program from one side of the world to the other. That occurs occasionally. Let's see if Dean Radin is still there. Dean?
I'm still here, Art.
Thank goodness. All right, Dean. I was going to ask you if the GCBP Egg Basket Observer is still online, but since we had that little break, I took a second, and I'm looking at it right now. So if people would like to take a look at this, I would recommend going to Google and just putting in Princeton eggs, and it will take you to the appropriate website. It's too long for me to read to you, but they're obviously, the thing is still going. I'm sitting here watching the eggs bounce up and down. It's kind of eerie, isn't it?
Yeah, what you're looking at is a movie made of the behavior of all of the eggs over the past 24 hours.
Really?
And there's a number of new displays that are being developed to help visualize what's going on in this thing. And by the way, you asked, well, what's next? How are we going to advance this? And there actually are some advancements. One of them is a clue that we've known for some years, that psi ability in general seems to be modulated by the geomagnetic field, the Earth's magnetic field. You may remember when the Conscious Universe first came out, one of the chapters talks about psi and the casino. Since I was in Las Vegas, surrounded by casinos, I had always hoped that I could get some data on what actually goes on in the games from one day to the next, because of the possibility that if we're really dealing with environmental modulation of these abilities, that we'd be able to see it in that data. So I did an analysis. I was fortunate enough to get some data for 4 years' worth of daily games, table games, and thought machines. And I made a guess that the lunar cycle would modulate with psi ability. And the reason is that when the moon is full, it's actually in the tail of the magnetosphere. And what that means is that you can imagine the Earth's magnetic field like a sphere around the Earth, but because there's a solar wind, the solar wind turns that sphere into more like a teardrop shape. And the teardrop, when the moon is full, the teardrop goes quite far away from the Earth, and the moon is right in the tail. And as a result, it tends to dampen the fluctuations in the magnetic field. So over the long term, during the full moon, the Earth's geomagnetic field tends to be somewhat quieter than it is at other times. And so I figured, well, if it's true that what we've seen in many other studies, that a quiet geomagnetic field seems to improve psi ability, then maybe that people would win more during those times because it'd be just a tiny little bit more psychic. So that was the working hypothesis, and I did the analysis, and sure enough, to my shock, people actually were winning a few percentage more during the time of the full moon.
Wow, the way casinos work, I would think that would concern them greatly because they operate on most of them anyway, on a pretty small percentage of win. So that's amazing. That's
the general managers who I spoke to were overjoyed because now there was a new reason for people to come into the casino. And, of course, as you know, the longer people stay in a casino, even if you end up winning a jackpot, you just stay there and you put all your money back in.
That's true.
So from the casino's point of view, it was great. It was like a good reason to attract people, come for a full moon madness and that sort of thing.
All right. I want to ask you about this. It's fascinating to me. I don't know a thing about it, but it's on the little sheet that they give me before the show, and it says, if somebody wants to experiment with a field REG system, like the eggs used in the Global Consciousness Project, somebody now apparently is making some kind of device that you can buy. I hadn't heard a word about this. Tell me about it.
As you know, the research program at Princeton closed a few years ago when the primary professor retired.
Right.
But there have been so many people who have dealt with that program over the years, including myself and students from Princeton, that one of the students was entrepreneurial and said, you know what, we can take these random number generators and make it a commercial product. So there's now a company called Psyleron, Psyleron, Psyleron.com, which makes random number generators, which are basically identical to the ones that were used in the Princeton lab for many years. And so I happened to see them at a conference this past weekend, and I said, well, I think people would be interested in playing with one of these little boxes. It's a little box you attach to your PC, and you can use it for field consciousness experiments yourself. And they said, well, if you mention it on the air, then we'll give the listeners of Coast to Coast a special discount if they use the code word Art Bell. So now you know. You can buy this device, and it comes with software, mainly, I think, for PCs.
All right, before people think we're doing some sort of infomercial, we're not. You're not affiliated in any way with this company, right?
No, I'm not affiliated with them in any way. I just am appreciative that somebody had the business sense to make this thing into a little box so people can play with it. Because I get asked all the time by people, how would I go about experimenting with this concept? And now there's a way. You go to a company.
Well, God bless them. All right, I want to know about it. So when you hook this thing up to your PC, what do you have? What are you seeing on the screen? What can you interpret from what you see? Well, first, what do you see on the screen? What does it do?
Well, there's several different modes, but for a field consciousness kind of experiment, you basically set it up and it just runs all by itself. So you're not. I mean, if you want to, you can intently concentrate, like meditate or something, for a few minutes and see whether the curve that is being created deviates away from chance. You could do that. But typically, as the way that we've used these experiments is you bring your PC and you bring this device to something which you know is going to be very engaging, like a choir or a play or a movie or something where you know there's a lot of people and they're all paying attention. And you just run it. You run it in the vicinity where this is taking place.
Right.
And then when it's over, you go back and you can check the data, and there's an automatic way to do an analysis to see whether or not the randomness became less random during those periods when people were very engaged in something.
Is there any indicator on the screen, something like the display we see with the eggs, for example, so that you're aware instantaneously if something begins to deviate from the random?
Yes. One of the options is you can press a button and see a real-time curve which shows you how close you are to chance or how far away you are from chance.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, this particularly sounds interesting in view of the recent apparent evidence that the closer to the event you are, the larger effect you're going to see. Another thing, I guess not fully answered yet, is whether we're seeing some individual, particularly effective consciousness at work or mass consciousness at work. I guess you feel it's mass consciousness, but we don't know anything for sure, do we?
Well, we don't know much yet, but the value of people doing these experiments is maybe we'll begin to learn more. My guess is that when we deal with mass consciousness, the key underlying, the thing which is most important is coherence. So whether that's coherence within one person or coherence among a group, it's much easier to create coherence within yourself